They broke you, now they'll meet what they created. But this truth didn't arrive in a single moment. It came slowly, like a storm forming behind your ribs, like a shadow learning how to breathe. You weren't always this version of yourself. There was a time when you still believed people meant what they said, when you trusted hands that were never meant to hold you, when you opened your heart without asking whether the world deserved it. And every time you gave, they took. Every time you softened, they sharpened their claws. You kept thinking maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time someone would see your worth without asking you to bleed for it. But the world rarely gives softness a place to rest. It uses it, bends it, reshapes it into something unrecognizable. Until one day you wake up and realize you become the very thing you feared, not because you wanted to, but because they pushed and pushed until there was no part of you left untouched by their fingerprints. You didn't notice the breaking at first. Breaks don't happen loudly, they happen in the quiet moments. When someone talks over your voice, when someone laughs at your pain, when someone you trusted disappears the moment you need them. Those were the cracks forming, those were the whispers of the old you fading. You kept telling yourself you were just tired, just stressed, just overthinking, when the truth was you were changing, not by choice, but by survival. The world doesn't ask if you're ready to evolve. It forces you into evolution through disappointment, betrayal, and silence. And piece by piece, the softer parts of you began to harden. What used to hurt you began to teach you. What used to break you began to build you. At first, you resisted this transformation. You tried to hold on to who you used to be. You tried to stay gentle in a world that fed on your gentleness. You tried to remain forgiving even when people kept giving you reasons to stop. But there always comes a last straw, an invisible moment where the heart simply snaps into a new shape. No one sees it except you. No one hears it except the part of you that has been screaming quietly for years. And in that final moment, something inside you shifted so deeply that going back became impossible. The person they broke was gone. Not buried, not hid, and gone. And in that emptiness, a new version of you began assembling itself, piece by deliberate piece. This new you wasn't born out of darkness alone. It was born out of clarity. You started seeing people for who they truly were, not who you hoped they could be. You stopped believing promises that were only made to keep you still. You stopped letting your heart be a place others came to feel better about themselves. Your silence grew sharp. Your presence became heavier. Your eyes began carrying stories no one fully understood. And in that transformation, there was a strange kind of freedom. Not the kind that feels light, but the kind that feels powerful. The kind that comes when nothing scares you anymore. Not loss, not solitude, not disappointment. Because once you've been broken by the people you trusted most, nothing the world throws at you feels unfamiliar. Pain becomes a language you speak fluently, and strength becomes a reflex rather than a choice. They didn't expect this version of you. People who break others never think about what comes after. They assume you'll stay shattered because that's easier for them. A broken person is predictable. A broken person is manageable. But when you finally rose, not out of hope, but out of necessity, you became everything they never prepared for. Your silence stopped being weakness and became discipline. Your distance stopped being sadness and turned into boundaries. Your heart stopped being open to everyone and instead became a fortress with a door only you control. They don't understand this new version because it doesn't serve them anymore. It doesn't bend, doesn't chase, doesn't apologize for having a backbone. And now as they watch you move differently, more steady, more aware, more selective, they feel the shift. They feel the consequence of their own actions. You're not cruel, you're just done, you're not heartless. You're just focused, you're not angry, you're awakened, and that scares them because the person they broke was comfortable to them. The person you are now is a mirror they don't want to face. You carry a quiet strength they can't manipulate. You carry a calmness that makes their chaos worthless. You carry a presence that reminds them their place in your life was never guaranteed. And while they wonder what happened to the version of you who tolerated everything, you don't bother explaining. Because they wouldn't understand that your evolution wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. You didn't harden because you wanted to hurt them. You hardened because you finally realized no one else was going to protect the parts of you they kept breaking. So you became your own shield. You became your own sword. You became your own foundation. They broke you. But what they created is not a monster. It's a survivor. It's a warrior. It's a version of you that doesn't fall for the same tricks, doesn't tolerate the same disrespect, doesn't shrink for anyone's comfort, and whether they like it or not, they will have to face this version. They will have to face the consequences of shaping you into someone who no longer needs them, someone who no longer fears walking alone, someone who no longer accepts half love, half truths, or half effort. They broke you, and now for the first time they'll meet what they created. And this time, the story doesn't end with you falling apart. It ends with you standing taller than ever, calm, unbothered, untouchable. You didn't realize how far you had come until life placed you in moments that would have once broken you completely. Moments where the old version of you would have begged for answers, clung to people who were slipping away, tried to fix situations that were already dead. But this time you didn't bend, you didn't fall apart, you didn't question your worth. Instead, you stood there with a stillness that came from everything you had survived. That stillness wasn't emptiness, it was power. A quiet, unshakable power that came from knowing exactly who you are, what you deserve, and what you will never again allow. And it was in those moments that you finally understood something vital. You were never weak. You were never broken beyond repair. You were simply becoming. The world around you didn't change. The people didn't magically become kinder. The disappointments didn't stop happening. What changed was your relationship with yourself. You stopped looking at your reflection as someone who needed saving and started seeing someone who knew how to rise. You stopped identifying with your wounds and started identifying with the strength it took to carry them. You stopped blaming yourself for the way others treated you and started holding them accountable in silence. Not with arguments, not with explanations, but with absence, with distance, with standards too high for people who had always aimed too low. And as this new identity settled into your bones, life began testing you, not to break you again, but to show you how unbreakable you had finally become. The same situations that once kept you awake now barely moved your heartbeat. The same people who once held power over you now felt small in comparison to your vision. Their opinions lost weight, their judgments lost relevance, their presence lost importance, because for the first time in your life, you were no longer driven by the need to be understood. You were driven by the need to be aligned, with peace, with purpose, with the future you were building piece by piece. People around you began to sense this shift long before you did. They noticed that your eyes didn't react the way they used to, that your voice didn't tremble the way it once did, that your energy no longer opened doors for those who only walked in to take. You had become someone they couldn't manipulate with guilt, couldn't weaken with doubt, couldn't control with attention, and that frightened them, not because you became dangerous, but because you became independent. Your self-worth was no longer tied to their presence. Your happiness was no longer tied to their validation. Your identity was no longer shaped by their acceptance. But independence always comes with a cost. The moment you stop being who others want, you lose people who were never meant to stay, and you felt those losses deeply, not because you needed them, but because a part of you still wished the world was kinder. You wish people would stay without needing you to shrink. You wish love wouldn't require pain to prove itself. You wish loyalty didn't come with conditions, but wishes don't change reality. And reality taught you that letting go isn't a sign of coldness. It's a sign of growth. You learned that keeping people who drain you is more painful than walking alone. You learned that staying where you are not valued is more damaging than any goodbye. And so you let them go, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with understanding. Understanding that not everyone is meant to rise with you. And as those empty spaces formed around you, something incredible began to happen. You started to hear your own thoughts more clearly. Your ambitions became louder than your fears. Your dreams became bigger than your wounds. You saw opportunities where you used to see limitations. You felt possibilities where you used to feel doubt. For the first time, your future didn't feel like a question. It felt like a destination, not one you would stumble into, but one you were actively walking toward, fueled by every hardship you had overcome. You became more selective with your energy, more protective of your heart, more intentional with your time. You stopped explaining your decisions to people who weren't even qualified to guide their own lives. You stopped seeking closure from those who didn't deserve access to your healing. You stopped correcting rumors that were never meant to honor your truth. Instead, you let people think whatever made them feel comfortable, because you finally understood something crucial. Your peace is more important than their perception. And as you embraced this mindset, your world shifted again. not from the outside, but from within. You woke up with more clarity, your steps became more deliberate, your isolation felt less like loneliness and more like preparation. Every day felt like a quiet sharpening, a refining of your character, a deepening of your purpose. You weren't just healing, you were evolving. You weren't just moving on, you were leveling up. And with each level, the same people who once broke you were forced to watch from the sidelines as you became someone they could never again reach. They may never admit it, but they see it, they feel it. They know they no longer have access to your mind, to your emotions, to your vulnerability. They know they can't walk into your life the way they used to. They know the door they once freely opened now requires a key no one holds but you. So they stand there, confused by the strength they helped create, unsettled by the power they never expected you to claim. They broke you because they thought you would stay broken, but all they did was awaken a force that had been asleep inside you for far too long. Now every step you take is a reminder of what they lost. Every boundary you set is a reminder of what they can no longer touch. Every victory you achieve is a reminder that they underestimated the wrong soul. You are no longer defined by what happened to you. You are defined by what you built after the world tried to destroy you. This is who you are now, not the broken version they left behind, not the silent version they ignored, but the powerful version they created without meaning to. And soon, they will understand you didn't rise despite them. You rose because of them. They never imagined you would rise this far, this fast, this fearlessly, because in their calculations of your weakness, they forgot one simple truth. A person who has already lost everything cannot be threatened anymore, and the moment you stopped fearing loss, you became dangerous in a way they cannot understand. They see you now, and they don't recognize the version of you standing in front of them. They thought you'd still be the cracked version of your past, begging for answers, waiting for closure, drowning in questions that never found their way home. But you didn't rise with answers, you rose with fire. You rose with silence so loud it shakes their bones. They thought they were done with you, but they didn't realize they were still living inside the consequences of breaking you. And now each day you walk forward, you carry something they can never reclaim, the power to write your own destiny without their fingerprints anywhere on it. You don't walk like someone who healed perfectly. You walk like someone who learned how to move even with scars. And scars terrify them more than wounds, because wounds can be pitied. But scars are trophies of survival. Scars are proof you didn't die when they expected you to. Scars say you've met hell and returned without asking anyone for directions. You learn to breathe in places most people would choke. You learn to stand in storms most people would crawl through. You learn to stay calm while the world tried to convince you the fire was supposed to consume you. Instead, you inhaled the flames and exhaled strength. They can't understand how someone they tried to break now walks with a spine made of steel they didn't see growing. They can't understand how someone they left in the dirt now rises with eyes that carry a storm bigger than anything they ever threw at you. There was a version of you that once needed them. That version cried, begged, explained, apologized for things that were never your fault. That version got hurt because it believed love meant softness at any cost. That version didn't realize the world often rewards cruelty, not kindness. But that version is gone now, buried under the weight of everything you survived. What stands here now isn't an upgraded version of your past self. It's a completely rewritten entity, someone who doesn't need permission, validation, or acceptance. Someone who trusts silence more than promises. Someone who reads intentions before words. Someone who knows that heartbreak wasn't the end of anything, it was the beginning of everything. You didn't rebuild yourself, you reforged yourself, and forged things don't bend easily. Forged things don't break the same way twice. They hoped you'd forget what they did. They hoped time would erase their shadows from your story, but time didn't erase anything, it only sharpened your vision. It taught you to see people for who they are, not who they pretend to be. It taught you to love deeper but trust slower. It taught you that betrayal is not a sign of your weakness. It's a sign of someone else's character, collapsing under the weight of their own insecurities. They believed you would spend your life chasing answers, but you learned that closure doesn't come from people, it comes from truth, from acceptance, from choosing to walk away even when your heart tries to drag you back. Now you move without looking over your shoulder. Now you walk without carrying the ghosts of your past inside your chest. Now every step you take echoes with a confidence that was carved from pain, not gifted by kindness. And as you rise higher, you'll notice an unexpected silence from the very people who once shouted the loudest against you. They don't criticize anymore. They don't mock anymore. They don't underestimate anymore. Because now, every time they look at you, they see the proof of their biggest miscalculation. They see the consequences of underestimating a soul that refused to die. They see the outcome of trying to break someone who wasn't fragile, just wounded. They see the person they tried to bury now standing above the ground they used to step on. And that realization hits them harder than anything you could ever say. Your success isn't revenge. Your calm isn't revenge. Your distance isn't revenge. Your existence, your growth, your unshakable presence, that is the real revenge. Because nothing hurts a person more than watching someone they once tried to destroy becoming someone they can never reach again. The truth is, you don't even think about them the way they think about you. You don't replay conversations. You don't rehearse what you should have said. You don't waste your nights imagining different endings. You've outgrown the places where they try to keep you small. You've outgrown the people who were afraid of your potential. You've outgrown the version of yourself that believed their words were facts. Now you walk with a quiet confidence that doesn't need noise to be felt. Now you carry a strength that doesn't need to be proven. It's simply there in your voice, in your presence, in the way you stand unbothered by their opinions. You are not who they left. You are not who they broke. You are who you became in the ruins they created, and that makes you unstoppable in ways they never saw coming. And maybe one day, when life forces them to face their own emptiness, they'll remember you not as the broken person they mocked, but as the unshakable storm they accidentally created. They'll remember your silence, your resilience, your rise. They'll remember the day you stopped waiting for them to fix what they shattered and chose to build yourself from the ashes they left behind. And in that moment, they will finally understand what they birthed when they broke you, not a victim, not a wounded soul, but a force powerful enough to rewrite its own fate. You didn't reach this point overnight. Strength doesn't appear suddenly. It grows in the dark, in moments when your chest feels too heavy to lift, when the world feels colder than your skin, when you lie awake wondering how many more hits you can take before you completely disappear. But the truth is, you already disappeared once. When they broke you, a part of you slipped into silence, into hiding, into a space inside yourself where no one could reach you. You learned to live quietly. You learned to think instead of react. You learned to observe instead of trust. That silence became your first weapon. No one noticed it, not even you. But every day you held your tongue instead of explaining yourself. Every day you chose distance instead of repeating old mistakes. Every day you stayed calm instead of exploding. That silence was shaping you into something new. People often mistake silence for surrender, but in your case, it was preparation. You weren't withdrawing because you were weak. You were pulling back because you needed to see the battlefield clearly. You needed to understand who stood with you and who was only standing close enough to watch you fall. You learned more in those quiet moments than you ever learned from the noise of people's promises. You saw truths you had avoided. You noticed patterns you ignored. You recognized behaviors you once excused. And as painful as it was, that awareness became the fuel for your transformation. You started realizing that the world doesn't honor the gentle. It consumes them, it exhausts them, it uses their loyalty as a convenience, their effort as an expectation, their forgiveness as a loophole. So you shifted, not because you wanted revenge, but because you wanted peace. And peace required boundaries, peace required strength, peace required a version of you that wouldn't collapse every time life shook the ground beneath your feet. So you built that version slowly, brick by emotional brick, until the foundation beneath you was finally stronger than the storms around you. There were nights you questioned whether the transformation was real or just another temporary phase of hurt. But then you started noticing the differences. The messages you once felt obligated to answer didn't move you anymore. The people who used to manipulate your kindness found no doorway to push. The situations that once triggered your anger now met your indifference. Not the cold kind that comes from bitterness, but the calm kind that comes from understanding your worth. You weren't reacting, you were deciding. You weren't defending, You were recognizing what no longer deserved your energy. And yet, through all of this, a strange loneliness followed you. Not the empty kind, but the reflective kind. Growth often creates space. Space between who you were and who you are becoming. You felt the distance increasing. Friends who once felt familiar now felt like strangers. Relationships that once grounded you now felt like sand under your feet. You weren't losing people. You were shedding versions of yourself that tied you to them. That separation wasn't a punishment. It was a sign. A sign that the old environment could never nurture the new you growing inside. You were outgrowing the places where you had once fit too comfortably. And of course, they noticed. People always notice when the person they were used to controlling suddenly stops shrinking. They noticed your silence wasn't fear anymore, it was strength. They noticed your distance wasn't sadness, it was clarity. They noticed your boundaries weren't walls, they were gates with locks they no longer had keys to. They saw the shift but didn't understand its purpose. You weren't becoming heartless, you were becoming defined. You weren't abandoning people, you were abandoning patterns. You weren't growing colder, you were growing wiser. But wisdom changes the way you walk. It changes the way you look at the world, the way you look at yourself, the way you allow others to look at you. You began carrying yourself with a quiet certainty, a stillness that unnerved those who once thrived on your chaos. They didn't know what to do with this version of you, the one who didn't crumble, didn't over-explain, didn't break into pieces just because someone couldn't handle your shine. You became the kind of calm that is mistaken for danger, the kind of presence that can't be manipulated, the kind of strength that doesn't need to be loud. Your growth became their discomfort. Your healing became their confusion. Your transformation became their consequence. They broke you because they believed you would stay broken, and for a while you did. But broken people don't stay shattered forever, not when survival becomes their only path forward. You collected every fragment they left inside you, every disappointment, every betrayal, every ignored cry for help, and one by one, you rebuilt yourself. Not into the person you used to be, but into the person you needed to become. The one who no longer bends under pressure. The one who no longer depends on validation. The one who no longer gives people the power to define your worth. Now they stand on the outside, looking at a version of you they can't predict, can't control, can't diminish. They see strength where they once saw softness. They see fire where they once saw fear. They see confidence where they once saw doubt. And most of all, they see distance, the kind of distance that says, I finally learned who I am without you. This is what they created, though they won't admit it. They will blame your change on pride. They will blame your boundaries on ego. They will blame your silence on attitude. They will say you became different. They will say you became cold. They will say you became selfish. But they will never say they pushed you to this point. They will never acknowledge the role they played in your evolution. Because accepting their part means accepting the loss of access to you, and that loss is their punishment. You didn't rise to prove anything to them. You rose because staying broken was no longer an option. You rose because drowning in your own heartbreak was no longer a life. You rose because the person you were destined to become was waiting on the other side of the pain they caused. They broke you, yes, but what you built from those pieces is something they can never break again. You didn't realize it at first, but every time you chose yourself over their expectations, every time you took one step away from who they wanted you to be, you moved closer to the version of yourself you were meant to become. Growth is not a dramatic explosion. It is a quiet unfolding. It happens in the moments no one sees, when you sit alone with your thoughts and unlearn the lies people fed you. They told you that you were too emotional, too sensitive, too complicated. But what they never understood was that your depth was not a flaw, it was a gift. They just didn't know how to meet you there. So instead of rising to your level, they broke you down until you no longer recognized your own reflection. But once the fog cleared, once the hurt settled and turned into understanding, you saw exactly who you were without their shadows blocking your light. You became intentional. Every step you took had purpose. Every silence had meaning. Every boundary had history behind it. You didn't build walls to keep the world out. You built them to protect the parts of you that were too valuable to be mishandled again. You started moving in ways that honored your spirit. You stopped entertaining conversations that drained you. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped trying to fix relationships that were breaking you more than they were building you. And that was the beginning of true power. The moment you realized you didn't need to be available to everyone. You only needed to be loyal to yourself. But with each layer you shed, the world around you changed too. People who once relied on your softness now found themselves confused by your strength. They reached for you expecting the old version, the one who always said yes, the one who always forgave without question, the one who twisted themselves into shape just to keep the peace. But you were no longer that person. You no longer folded yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold you. You stood tall in your truth, even when your voice shook. You honored your own boundaries even when it meant walking alone. In that shift, this awakened and created a ripple effect they couldn't ignore. Some people responded with anger. They blamed you for changing, never acknowledging that it was their behavior that demanded your transformation. Others responded with silence, hoping you would collapse under the weight of your newfound independence. Some tried to guilt you back into the version of yourself that served them, whispering things like, "You've changed," as if it were an insult, as if growth were a crime. But the most revealing were the ones who suddenly treated you like a stranger, because they only loved the version of you that dimmed their own insecurities. Your strength exposed their weakness, and instead of rising to meet you, they withdrew into the comfort of their limitations. It hurt at first, losing people you once believed would walk with you through every chapter. But with time, you began to understand a truth you had avoided for too long. Not everyone who starts with you is meant to stay. Some people are lessons wrapped in skin. Some are mirrors showing you everything you need to fix within yourself. And some are storms disguised as shelter. Their departure wasn't your loss, it was your release. A clearing of space, a removal of noise, a making of room for something greater. And in that space, something extraordinary happened. You began hearing yourself again. Your intuition grew louder. Your ambitions grew clearer. Your heart grew braver. The world that once felt too heavy suddenly felt like something you could carry. You started learning how to trust yourself in ways you never had before. You made decisions without asking for opinions. You took steps without waiting for approval. You stopped seeking permission to live the life that belonged to you. And where fear once sat, confidence took its place. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that breathes calmly even in chaos. This new strength wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. It connected you to your purpose in a way the old you could never have understood. The challenges that once crushed you now became stepping stones. The setbacks that once defeated you now became reminders of what you were capable of surviving. You stopped seeing yourself as a victim of your past and started seeing yourself as the architect of your future. Every scar became a blueprint. Every heartbreak became a lesson. Every ending became an invitation to something bigger. You became more grounded in reality, but more connected to something beyond it. You realized that not every battle was worth fighting, not every insult deserved a reaction, not every presence was worth keeping. You learned to choose peace over proving yourself. You learned to choose solitude over company that drained your spirit. You learned to choose silence over conversations that didn't nourish your mind. And with every choice, you grew more aligned with your destiny. Your energy shifted, your vision sharpened. The world around you could feel it. There was a new gravity in the way you walked, a new depth in the way you looked at people, a new certainty in the way you spoke. You no longer begged for respect. You embodied it. You no longer chased love. You attracted it. You no longer pleaded for loyalty. You required it. And this shift wasn't arrogance. It was protection. Protection for the parts of you that had been mishandled for too long. Protection for the heart that had carried too many disappointments. Protection for the future that was too important to be compromised by old wounds. And now as people watch this transformation, they whisper in confusion, "What happened to you?" But they will never understand that what happened to you was exactly what they caused. They broke you into pieces so they could pick the version that served them. But instead of staying shattered, you used every fragment to build someone they could never again predict or control. This is the version of you they never wanted to meet. This is the version of you they feared you could become. This is the version of you that rises, quietly, powerfully, relentlessly. And the most beautiful part, you're just getting started.